There are 5 properties of exponents that we need to know for this week. The first one says anything to the 0 power is 1. Let's look at some examples. A to the 0. That's 1. What about if we have a lot of stuff inside parentheses raised to the 0 power? Well, 2a b to the 4th over 4 is all, when you raise it to the 0 power, it's all just 1. Now you do have to be a little bit careful if only part of it is raised to the 0 power. For example, if you have a b to the 0, well, a is not being raised to the 0 power, only the b is. So the b is 1, the a is still a, so we have a times 1, which is a. The second property says when multiplying variables to powers, add the exponents. Here's an example. I have x squared y cubed z times x, y to the negative 2, z to the 4th. I'm multiplying these variables together, so I'm going to add the exponents. Let's look at the x's. We have x to the 2nd power times x to the 1st power. Add the exponents and we get x to the 3rd power. Let's look at the y's. Y to the 3rd power times y to the negative 2. When you add those, 3 plus negative 2, 3 plus negative 2, that's 3 minus 2, which is 1. And finally the z's. Z to the 1 times z to the 4th, add those exponents and you get a 5 up there. And normally we don't write any powers that are just a 1, so we would write x cubed y z to the 5th. Property 3. When dividing variables with powers, subtract the exponents. Let's look at example 3. We have x to the 4th, y to the cube, z squared, over y, x squared, z. We need to subtract the exponents. Let's look at the x's. X to the 4th over x to the 2nd power. Subtract 4 minus 2, and that is going to give us an x squared. Let's look at the y's. Y to the 3rd over y to the 1st. That's going to give you y to the 3 minus 1, which is also the 2nd power. And finally the z's. Z to the 2nd power over z to the 1st. That will give z to the 2 minus 1, which is z to the 1 power. So this is a simplified form of example 3. 2 more properties. Number 4 says when raising a variable or a number or a term to a negative exponent, you need to flip it over. Some examples. If I have 2/3 raised to the negative 1, that's the same as 3/2 to the positive 1, which is just 3/2. If I had 2/3 to the negative 2, that would be 3/2 to the positive 2. So you see I'm flipping it over and I'm making that exponent positive. Now what we would do is square both terms. The term on the top, 3 squared, is 9. The term on the bottom, 2 squared, is 4. This same thing applies if it's just a number. For example, if I just have, let's say, just x raised to the negative 3rd power. I need to flip it over. Well, how do I flip over something that's not a fraction? Think of it as being over 1. So now I'm going to flip it over, 1 over x, now to the positive 3rd power. And when I raise each of those to the 3rd power, this simplifies to 1 over x to the 3rd power. 1 to the 3rd on top, x to the 3rd on the bottom. Let's look at an example that's a little bit harder here on the right-hand side. Now I have 2a squared, b to the negative 3c, over 8, a to the negative 1, b, c squared. We're going to use all of the properties that we've used already. So let's first look at the numbers. 2 over 8 out in front. Well, for regular numbers we don't subtract, we only do that with exponents. So 2 over 8, if I divide the top and bottom, in other words put this in lowest terms, that's the same as 1 over 4. So we're going to keep a 1 on the top, but I'm not going to write it, and a 4 on the bottom. Now let's look. I have some things to a negative exponent, so those particular things I'm going to flip over. For example, this a to the negative 1 is going to be flipped up to the top, and the b to the negative 3rd will be flipped down to the bottom. So I will have a squared, that a to the negative 1 is now an a to the positive 1, and the c on the top. On the bottom now, the b to the 3rd got flipped down to the bottom. Now it has a positive exponent. There's still the b and the c squared. Alright, well let's continue. Let's combine some terms here, a squared times a to the first. We learned in property 2 that when multiplying variables with powers, we add the exponents. That's going to give you 2 plus 1 is 3. On the bottom, we have b to the third times b. That's 3 plus 1, which gives you a b to the fourth, and a c squared. Now, it's not totally simplified until there's only one instance of each variable. So here, since there's a c on top and c on the bottom, I still need to do something. And property 3 says when I divide variables, I subtract the exponents. Well, this is a c to the 1, c to the 2, subtract 1 minus 2 is negative 1. A cubed c to the negative 1 over 4b to the fourth. One other thing, though, is that we don't like to leave something with a negative exponent. So rather than leave it with a negative exponent, we're going to use property 4 that says we're going to flip this down to the bottom here, and we'll get our final answer here of a cubed over 4b to the fourth c. Now, property 5, when raising a power to a power, you multiply. And I'll show you what I mean in example 5. Now first, we know that when we think about PEMDAS, we do things inside parentheses first. Is there anything we can do inside the parentheses? Well, I see a b on top and a b on the bottom. What I can do is cancel out those b's. It's just like property 3 about dividing, where I have a 1 minus a 1, which is a 0, and b to the 0, as property 1 says, b to the 0 is just 1. So I'm just going to cancel those out. Let's see what's left. 2a squared over 3c cubed and raised to a negative 2 power. So property 4 says, well, a negative exponent, we're going to flip it over. That 2a squared goes on the bottom, and the 3c cubed goes on the top. We flipped it over, and we need to make that a positive 2 now. The next thing we do is apply that squared power to each term. So it's going to be 3 squared, c cubed squared, and both of those terms on the bottom as well. So that's going to give us 3 squared, c cubed squared. This is one where I'm raising a power to a power, and that's when property 5 says I'm actually just going to multiply. That's going to be 3 times 2. Down here it's 2 squared, a squared squared, which is 2 times 2. Now, don't get confused between the numbers in front, the coefficient, and the variable. The coefficient in front, the 3 squared, I'm not multiplying there. That is 3 times 3. That's 3 squared, which is 9. But c is going to be raised to the 6th power, 3 times 2. On the bottom, we have 2 squared, which is 4, and a to the 4th.